So this is the Razer Wolverine V2 Chroma Pro Controller for Xbox and PC. Now, just given how competitive online gaming is nowadays, having the slightest advantage over the competition literally means life or death, win or lose. So if you're thinking about picking up a Pro Controller, let's see if the Razer Wolverine V2 is right for you. Now, regarding pricing, there are two Wolverines to choose from. There's your base Wolverine V2, which retails for $99.99, and then there's the Wolverine V2 Chroma, which is what we have here, which retails for $150. Now, the main difference between the base controller and the Chroma controller is that the Chroma controller has the 4 back triggers, interchangeable thumbsticks, a detachable USB-C cable, and most importantly, RGB. But in all seriousness, I feel that if you are looking into getting a Pro controller, you do want to go with the Chroma, because the Chroma has the back triggers, which is really what's going to give you the edge over the competition. Nonetheless, if you want to pick this controller up, it'll be linked down below. Now, whether you decide to go with the base Wolverine V2 or Wolverine V2 Chroma, they both have mechanical switches located in both the action buttons and D-pad. Now, not only do these mechanical switches feel great, they also sound great, but just listen for yourself. So yeah, from a tactile standpoint, you get a very satisfying click from these buttons when you press them versus the membrane buttons that you might find on most other controllers. But from a performance standpoint, Razer claims that these buttons have an actuation time of 10 milliseconds versus other controllers that might have an actuation time of 13 milliseconds to 18 milliseconds, if not a little more. So obviously, the shorter the better. However, one very important thing to keep in mind about this controller is that in order to minimize latency, it's strictly a wired controller, which obviously has its pros and cons. Now, the major pro here is that since it's a wired controller, latency is lower than your wireless controllers. You don't got to worry about your controller running out of battery in the middle of a game, and you can also easily just plug this controller into either your Xbox Series whatever, Xbox One whatever, or PC with the 9-foot braided USB-A to USB-C cable that comes included with this controller. However, the major con here is that this controller is wired, so obviously it's not going to feel as sleek as a wireless controller. However, I did notice that as long as you're using a wireless headset, like let's say the Razer Cara Pro, you're not really going to mind the cable coming out of the controller itself. However, if you want to use a wired headset with this controller, you still can, because there is an audio jack on the bottom. And in order to control your headset's audio, you can press and hold on this button, and if you press up or down on the D-pad, that's going to adjust your in-game audio, and left and right will adjust your chat audio. But now let's talk about the ergonomics on this controller. Now, for starters, this controller is noticeably larger than the Xbox Series controller, and it's also a little larger than the Xbox One controller. So definitely, I feel this controller is going to be best suited for someone that has larger hands. Now, I'm 5'8", and I have average size hands, but I can definitely make this controller work. Now, it did take me a few hours to get used to the controller after using the Xbox Series controller for the last year and a half, but I'm comfortable with this controller now. However, I do feel this controller is going to be better suited for someone with larger hands because of the placement of their back triggers and just how narrow they are. They can be a little hard for me to reach, especially when I'm stressed out dealing with a third party. So for that reason, I feel this controller is going to be better suited for someone with slightly larger hands. But also from an ergonomic standpoint, the Razer Wolverine V2 Chroma weighs in at 270 grams without the drag that you might feel with the cable attached. And this is the same as your stock Xbox Series controller with a rechargeable battery in it. And it is a little lighter than your stock Xbox Series controller with disposable batteries in it, which weighs in at 289 grams. So weight-wise, this controller isn't too different from your stock controller. However, this controller does offer a lot more grip because the majority of its handles are covered in a smooth feeling, but very ribbed and tactile grip pad material. But now let's talk about the extra features found on the Wolverine V2 Chroma that you simply just won't find on your stock Xbox controller. For starters, there are the buttons on the back, which we've already talked about a few times already, and you can program them for different games so that you can do stuff like reload, heal, throw grenades, and switch firing modes without having to let go of the thumbsticks. Now, like I mentioned earlier, I do think these back buttons are a little narrow, but they definitely do still give you an advantage. However, besides the pedals on the back, this controller also has a pair of programmable buttons up top found right next to the triggers, giving us a total of 6 programmable buttons. Now, speaking of the triggers, there are trigger stop switches which will shorten the pull of your trigger. And personally, I really like turning this on the right trigger because it really does help with single firing either the Hemlock or R301. Next up are the customizable thumbsticks on this controller. Now, the caps magnetically attach themselves to the controller, and you do get 2 extra magnetic caps as well. Now, personally, I do like the convex cap on the right thumbstick because it really does help with aiming when you're in a close quarter combat situation. However, there's also a concaved cap with a longer stem, which could be good for you defensive players who like to snipe because it does allow you to be more precise with your aiming. But also, this larger stemmed cap could be useful either if you're playing a racing game or Ace Combat with a controller. And in order to fully customize your controller to your heart's content, there's the app. Now, in here, this is where you can make different button layouts for different games. Now, since I mainly play Apex, I mainly moved all of the D-pad functions to the back buttons. This way I can heal, switch firing modes, throw grenades, and throw heat shields, all without having to let go of my thumbsticks. But from this app is where you can also select from different lighting modes and customize the RGB to your liking. And you can also adjust the intensity of the rumbling on this controller. So with all that being said, if you're trying to get an edge over the competition, the Razer Wolverine V2 Chroma is a great programmable controller to consider. Now obviously you've got the programmable buttons on the back and up top, which will hopefully allow you to do more and react faster without actually having to let go of the thumbsticks. Now you can also customize your thumbsticks, you've got the hair triggers, and I absolutely love the mechanical switches in this controller. However, I do feel this controller is going to be better suited for someone with slightly larger hands, and if you do decide to go with this controller, you're going to have to go back to using a wired controller. But overall, I do like the Wolverine. If you made it this far, I guess you enjoyed the video, so hit that like button and get subscribed. It helps out more than you realize. If you want to pick any of the products up mentioned in this video, those will be linked in the description down below, and you can also support the channel by checking out the merch store. But other than that, I'll catch you next time.